"You probably won't need the house anymore," my daughter-in-law whispered to me at my husband's funeral as she pressed a motel brochure into my hand with a smile so cold it made my skin go numb. I looked down at the cheap folded paper between my black gloves while mourners gathered beneath the gray November sky around Noelle's grave. The motel was 20 miles outside town, right off Interstate 84, the kind of place people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. For a moment, I thought maybe I had misunderstood her. Grief can do strange things to the mind. But then Claire leaned closer, the scent of expensive perfume drifting through the damp cemetery air, and quietly said, "It's affordable, and they offer weekly rates for seniors." My fingers tightened around the brochure, but I said nothing. Around us, people were still offering condolences, hugging one another, dabbing tears from their eyes. My husband had been buried less than 15 minutes earlier. The pastor was speaking softly to Noelle's old friends near the rows of folding chairs. Someone from the church carried trays of coffee toward the reception hall across the cemetery grounds. And standing beside me, wearing diamond earrings Noelle once said looked too flashy for funerals, my daughter-in-law was calmly planning where I would go after being removed from my own home. Ryan stood a few feet away, pretending not to notice. My son kept his eyes fixed on the parking lot while he shoved his hands into the pockets of his wool coat. He looked exhausted, but not from grief. It was the look of a man avoiding something ugly because facing it would require courage he no longer had. I waited for him to say something. Anything. A correction. A protest. "Claire, stop." But the words never came. Instead, he glanced toward us briefly before looking away again. That silence hurt more than the brochure in my hand. Noelle and I had raised Ryan in the small white colonial house on Maplewood Drive nearly 40 years ago. I still remembered the day we carried him through the front door wrapped in a pale blue blanket, while Noelle worried endlessly about supporting a family on his electrician's salary. We built our entire life inside those walls. Every birthday candle, every Christmas morning, every late-night fever beside Ryan's childhood bed. And now, while dirt still rested fresh on my husband's grave, I could already feel myself being erased from that life piece by piece. "Mrs. Harper?" A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Denise Walker, one of Noelle's longtime co-workers from the utility company. Her mascara had smudged slightly beneath kind brown eyes. "Your husband was one of the best men I've ever known," she said gently. "He talked about you constantly." I forced a small smile. "Thank you. That means a lot." Denise squeezed my hand warmly before moving toward the reception hall. I watched her go, wondering when exactly kindness had started feeling unfamiliar inside my own family. Claire adjusted the sleeve of her tailored black coat and sighed quietly beside me. "We should probably get going soon," she said. The catering company only booked the church room until 4. The way she said it made Noelle's funeral sound like an inconvenient appointment squeezed into her schedule. I slipped the motel brochure into my purse slowly, careful not to crumple it. Claire noticed. Her lips curved slightly. Not enough for anyone else to see. Just enough for me. It was the smile of someone who believed the battle was already over. The cold wind lifted strands of my silver hair as guests slowly drifted toward their cars. The cemetery had emptied enough now that I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the interstate beyond the trees. I stared at Noelle's headstone, still surrounded by fresh flowers and damp earth. My chest ached with the kind of grief that settles into your bones and changes the shape of every breath. For 38 years, Noelle had been the steady center of my world. Even during hard times, I had never truly felt alone while he was alive. But standing there beside his grave, with that motel brochure hidden inside my purse like a cruel little eviction notice, I realized something far worse than widowhood had begun. I was no longer simply losing my husband. I was losing my place in my own family. Claire touched Ryan's arm lightly. "Honey, can you pull the car around?" she asked sweetly. He nodded immediately and headed toward the parking lot without looking at me once. Claire turned back toward me, her expression carefully polished for public view again. "I know this is hard, Evelyn," she said softly, "but sometimes change is necessary." I looked at her for several long seconds. Then I smoothed the front of my black dress, lifted my chin, and answered quietly, "You seem very prepared for this change." For the first time all afternoon, something flickered behind her eyes. Not guilt, not shame, surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to notice the cruelty hidden beneath her politeness. but it disappeared almost instantly. Claire simply smiled again. Calm, controlled, cold. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the grief and exhaustion and humiliation, something small and sharp began to wake up. The house felt different when we returned from the cemetery. Not emptier, not quieter, just unfamiliar. Like I had stepped into someone else's life by mistake. Ryan unlocked the front door and held it open for Claire first. She walked inside carrying a foil tray of untouched casserole from the church reception while I followed behind them slowly, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floors Noelle had refinished by hand almost 20 years earlier. I stood in the foyer for a moment after they disappeared into the kitchen. The scent of lilies from the funeral arrangements still lingered in the air, mixing with furniture polish and cold November rain drifting in from outside. My black coat suddenly felt too heavy on my shoulders. For 38 years, Noelle had always reached for me first when we came home from difficult days. A quiet touch on my arm, a gentle smile, sometimes nothing more than his presence standing beside me in silence. But now the silence felt enormous. Claire's voice floated from the kitchen. We should probably start sorting through some of Noelle's things this weekend. She spoke casually, as if discussing holiday decorations instead of my husband's belongings less than an hour after his funeral. Ryan answered too quietly for me to hear clearly. I moved slowly toward the staircase and rested my hand against the polished wooden banister Noelle installed himself one summer after watching home improvement videos late into the night. He had spent 3 weekends measuring every inch twice because he said shortcuts always became regrets later. I could still picture him standing right there with sawdust in his hair and that ridiculous old baseball cap he refused to throw away. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Grief arrived like that now. Sudden, sharp, hidden inside ordinary objects. I climbed the stairs carefully and entered our bedroom. Noelle's reading glasses still rested on the nightstand beside his unfinished mystery novel. His slippers remained perfectly aligned near the edge of the bed. The digital clock glowed 4:17 in soft blue numbers while rain tapped gently against the windows overlooking the backyard. Everything looked exactly the same, which somehow made it worse. I sat down slowly on the edge of the mattress and opened my purse. The motel brochure was still there. Bright yellow lettering. Weekly discounts. Complimentary cable television. The smiling couple printed on the front looked about 20 years younger than me and far happier than any real people staying in a roadside motel had ever been. I stared at it for a long time before folding it neatly and placing it inside the drawer of my nightstand. Not because I intended to use it, because I wanted to remember exactly how it felt. Downstairs, cabinet doors opened and closed. Claire's heels crossed the kitchen tile briskly while Ryan moved more slowly behind her. They sounded comfortable down there, established already, as though Noelle's absence had created space they intended to fill immediately. I remained upstairs until evening settled over the house in pale gray shadows. Eventually, I changed out of my funeral clothes into a cream sweater and soft flannel pants before making my way downstairs. The kitchen lights were bright enough to hurt my eyes after sitting in the dim bedroom for hours. Claire stood at the counter typing something on her phone while Ryan stared blankly at the television mounted above the fireplace. Neither of them noticed me at first. The guest room could work temporarily, Claire said quietly without looking up. But long term, we really need that space opened up. Ryan rubbed his forehead tiredly. Can we not do this tonight? There is never going to be a good night for this conversation, she replied calmly. And honestly, Ryan, avoiding it is only making things harder. I stepped into the room then. Claire immediately changed expressions the way actresses shift roles between scenes. Her face softened into polished sympathy. Evelyn, she said gently, I was just about to make tea. Would you like some? I looked at her for several seconds before answering. No, thank you. Ryan finally turned toward me. His eyes were red from exhaustion, but something else lived there now too. Distance. Like he had already begun separating himself emotionally from me before today even happened. Mom, he said quietly, you should try to rest. I nodded once. I probably should. The microwave clock read 6:42. Noelle used to start dinner by 6 every night because he believed people thought more kindly on full stomachs. I suddenly realized no one had eaten since the reception. Yet somehow hunger felt unimportant now. Claire picked up a stack of papers from the kitchen island and slid them neatly into a folder when she noticed me looking. Realtor brochures. paint samples, floor plan sketches. My stomach tightened slowly. You are redecorating? I asked quietly. Claire smiled politely. Just thinking ahead. Fresh starts can be healthy after loss. Healthy after loss. The phrase landed colder than the November rain outside. I glanced toward Noelle's favorite recliner near the fireplace. Claire's handbag rested carelessly across the seat. Something about that small detail hurt more than I expected. Ryan noticed my expression and stood quickly. Mom, it is not what you think. But he did not move the bag. None of us spoke for several long seconds. The refrigerator hummed softly behind us while rain streaked the dark kitchen windows. Finally, I turned away and walked toward the hallway without another word. As I reached the staircase, Claire called after me in that same sweet, measured voice. Oh, Evelyn, one more thing. A locksmith is coming tomorrow morning. Some of the exterior locks have been sticking lately. I stopped with my hand resting on the banister. Slowly, I looked back at her. She held my gaze steadily, smiling, calm, perfectly composed. And in that moment, standing inside the house where I had spent most of my adult life, I understood something terrible. Claire was not waiting for me to leave. She was preparing to make sure I could never stay. The locksmith arrived at exactly 9 the next morning. I heard his truck before I saw it, tires crunching slowly over the wet gravel of the driveway, while cold sunlight filtered weakly through the kitchen windows. Claire had already been awake for hours. I could smell fresh coffee downstairs and hear the quiet tapping of her laptop keys from the dining room. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment before standing. My joints ached from barely sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that motel brochure folded neatly in my nightstand drawer like a warning waiting patiently for its moment. When I walked downstairs, Claire looked up immediately with one of her polished little smiles. Good morning, Evelyn, she said brightly. I hope you managed to get some rest. I nodded faintly and reached for a coffee mug without answering. The dining room table was covered in paperwork again. Paint swatches, contractor estimates, real estate magazines. Claire casually slid a folder closed the moment she noticed me looking at it. Outside, the locksmith unloaded a toolbox from his truck. Ryan entered the kitchen a few seconds later wearing wrinkled jeans and a gray sweatshirt. His eyes looked tired. Morning, Mom, he muttered. I studied him carefully over the rim of my coffee cup. He used to resemble Noelle more every year. Same broad shoulders. Same dark hair beginning to gray at the temples. But lately the resemblance stopped there. Noelle had carried kindness naturally, even on difficult days. Ryan carried tension now, like a man trapped inside choices he no longer fully controlled. You really think all the locks need replacing? I asked quietly. Ryan hesitated before answering. Claire thought it would be safer. Claire did not even glance up from her laptop. The back door sticks sometimes, she added smoothly. And honestly, after everything that happened with Noelle, I just think updating security makes sense. Updating security. The phrase settled heavily in the room between us. I looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard where Noelle used to spend entire Saturday mornings trimming hedges with impossible precision. He believed a well-kept home reflected respect for the people living inside it. Last spring, he built a bird feeder near the oak tree because he said retirement finally gave him time to enjoy small things properly. The feeder still stood there now, untouched in the pale morning light. A cardinal landed briefly on the edge before flying away again. Mrs. Harper? The locksmith called politely from the front hallway. Could somebody confirm which doors you want rekeyed? Claire stood immediately. All exterior doors, she answered before I could speak. Front, back, garage, and basement. Something cold moved quietly through my chest. That seems excessive, I said. Claire finally looked at me directly. You can never be too careful these days. The locksmith nodded awkwardly and disappeared toward the garage. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, it is not personal. I almost smiled at that. Not personal. As if replacing every lock in the house while I still lived there could somehow be interpreted as neutral household maintenance. I carried my coffee into the living room and sat beside the fireplace. Noelle's recliner remained in the same spot, but Claire's handbag was gone now. In its place sat a stack of home renovation catalogs. White kitchens, open floor plans, luxury master suites. I picked one up slowly. A sticky note marked a page showing a remodeled upstairs bedroom with expanded closet space and soft gray walls. Written across the top in Claire's neat handwriting were the words, Future Primary Suite. I stared at the note for several long seconds before placing the catalog back exactly where I found it. Upstairs, footsteps moved through the hallway while the locksmith worked room by room. Metal clicked softly. Doors opened and closed. The sounds echoed strangely through the house, like pieces of my old life being quietly dismantled one lock at a time. Around noon, the doorbell rang. Claire answered it quickly while I remained seated near the fireplace. A cheerful female voice floated through the foyer. "Claire, I brought the lemon bars." I recognized the woman immediately. Melissa Grayson from 3 houses down. She entered carrying a glass baking dish wrapped in foil and stopped when she noticed me sitting in the living room. "Evelyn," she said softly, her expression falling. "I am so sorry about Noel." "Thank you," I answered gently. Melissa hesitated awkwardly before turning toward Claire. "I heard you two are planning some updates to the place." Claire smiled brightly. "Nothing major yet. Just trying to think ahead." Melissa nodded while glancing uncertainly between us. "Well, this neighborhood market is incredible right now. Houses are selling fast." Claire laughed lightly. "That is exactly what Ryan keeps saying." Ryan stepped into the room at that exact moment, carrying a box from upstairs. My stomach tightened immediately. It was one of Noel's old storage boxes from his office. Family photo albums, tax records, letters. I recognized the faded blue tape along the sides because I packed it myself years ago during a basement flood. "Where are you taking that?" I asked quietly. Ryan froze for half a second. "Just organizing things." Claire stepped beside him smoothly. "The upstairs office is cluttered, and we need space cleared for contractors to evaluate some structural ideas." Contractors. Structural ideas. They spoke about my home, now the way investors discuss abandoned property. Melissa shifted uncomfortably near the doorway. Clearly sensing tension, she did not understand. Ryan carried the box toward the garage without meeting my eyes. As he passed me, one of the folders near the top slid sideways slightly. I caught a glimpse of Noel's handwriting across a white envelope before the box disappeared from sight. My pulse slowed strangely. Not from panic anymore. From certainty. Because suddenly the timing of everything felt wrong. Too organized. Too prepared. The brochures. The paint samples. The locksmith. The contractors. Noel had been gone less than 48 hours. Yet Claire already moved through the house, like someone following plans created long before the funeral flowers arrived. I sat very still while rain clouds gathered outside the living room windows again. And for the first time since Noel died, a thought entered my mind that frightened me far more than grief itself. This did not begin after my husband's death. It began while he was still alive. That night, I waited until the house went quiet before walking into Noel's office. The room still smelled faintly of cedarwood aftershave and old paper, the same comforting scent that had followed him through every stage of our marriage. For years, this had been his sanctuary. A narrow room at the end of the upstairs hallway with built-in shelves, soft yellow lamplight, and jazz records stacked beside a vintage turntable he refused to replace. Noel liked routines. He balanced his checkbook every Thursday evening, watered the backyard roses every Saturday morning, listened to Frank Sinatra records whenever life became too noisy. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, suddenly afraid that stepping fully inside might make his absence feel permanent in a way I was not ready to survive. The desk drawers were partially open now. Not messy exactly, just disturbed. Like someone had searched through them quickly without understanding the order Noel always maintained so carefully. One cabinet door near the bookshelf hung slightly crooked. I touched the edge of it gently and remembered Noel spending nearly 2 hours adjusting those hinges last winter because he could not tolerate uneven doors. "Details matter," he always used to say. "People who ignore small things eventually lose the big things too." I sat slowly in his leather desk chair and rested my hands against the smooth wooden surface. A faint circle from his coffee mug still marked the corner despite my constant reminders to use coasters. My chest tightened unexpectedly at the sight of it. Grief had become strange lately. Not dramatic, not loud, just constant, like carrying invisible weight inside every breath. Outside the office window, rain slid softly down the glass while the streetlights cast pale reflections across the wet neighborhood sidewalks. Maplewood Drive looked peaceful at night. Families settling into warm kitchens. Televisions glowing softly through curtains. Ordinary lives continuing. I wondered how many women my age sat awake in dark houses realizing too late that the people they trusted most had quietly stopped seeing them as family. I opened the center drawer carefully. Pens, envelopes, utility bills. Nothing unusual at first. Then I noticed something tucked beneath Noelle's old calculator. A folded receipt from a locksmith company dated nearly 3 months earlier. My stomach tightened instantly. I unfolded the paper slowly. Service address, Harper Residence. Lock consultation and duplicate key request. I stared at the receipt for several long seconds while cold unease spread through my chest. 3 months ago, Noelle had still been alive. Healthy enough to mow the lawn himself. Strong enough to climb ladders and clean gutters despite my constant worrying. Why would he request duplicate keys without mentioning it to me? A soft memory surfaced suddenly. Late August. Noelle standing by the kitchen sink one evening looking distracted while drying dishes. I remembered asking if something was wrong. He had smiled faintly and said, "Just thinking about a few things." At the time, I assumed he meant retirement planning or Ryan's finances. Looking back now, I realized there had been something else in his expression. Worry. Quiet, hidden worry. I searched the drawer more carefully. Beneath a stack of warranty manuals sat a small brass key taped underneath the wooden compartment. My pulse quickened immediately. Noelle never taped things under drawers unless he truly wanted them hidden. I removed the key slowly and turned it over in my palm. A tiny white sticker attached to it read only 3 handwritten words in Noelle's careful block lettering. For Evelyn only. My throat tightened so suddenly I had to close my eyes for a moment. Noelle had known something. Maybe not everything, but enough to prepare for it quietly. Enough to hide things from everyone except me. Downstairs, floorboards creaked softly. I froze instinctively before hearing Claire's voice drift faintly through the vent system near the hallway. "She cannot stay here forever, Ryan." Her tone remained calm, controlled. The same voice she used with restaurant servers and charity committees and neighbors during block parties. Polite enough to sound reasonable, cold enough to make kindness feel impossible. Ryan answered too quietly for me to hear clearly. Then Claire again. "You know the house makes sense financially." I stared at the little brass key resting in my palm, while anger moved slowly through me for the first time since Noelle died. Not explosive anger. Worse, cold anger. The kind that settles carefully into place and waits. Another memory surfaced unexpectedly. About 6 months earlier, Noelle and I attended Ryan's birthday dinner downtown. Claire spent nearly half the evening discussing property values in our neighborhood. At one point she laughed and said, "Honestly, houses this size are wasted on empty nesters." I remembered how Noelle's smile faded almost invisibly after she said it. Later that night, while brushing his teeth beside me in the bathroom, he quietly asked, "If anything ever happened to me, would you stay here?" I laughed softly at the time and told him not to talk like that. Noelle looked at me through the mirror for several seconds before answering. "Promise me anyway." I had forgotten the conversation completely until now. Slowly, I opened the bottom cabinet beside his desk. Inside sat several neatly labeled storage boxes. Tax records, insurance papers, retirement documents. Everything arranged with Noelle's usual precision. But one box near the back looked newer than the others. A plain gray file box with no label at all. My heartbeat slowed strangely as I reached for it. The lid opened with a soft scrape. Inside rested a thick manila envelope, sealed carefully across the top. My name was written there in Noelle's handwriting. Evelyn Harper. Beneath it, in smaller letters, were 6 words that made my entire body go still. "Open only if you are alone." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal on the envelope. The paper inside felt thick and expensive beneath my fingertips, the kind Noelle always bought because he said important things deserved proper materials. For a moment, I simply stared at his handwriting before forcing myself to unfold the first page. "Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry." I stopped breathing for a second. Outside the office window, rain tapped softly against the glass while the house remained quiet downstairs. I could hear the faint hum of the dishwasher running in the kitchen and the occasional creak of floorboards beneath Ryan's footsteps. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life continuing beneath words that suddenly no longer felt ordinary at all. I kept reading slowly. I pray I am wrong about what I suspect, but lately I have noticed things that trouble me deeply. Claire has been asking detailed questions about the house, my accounts, and the trust. Ryan brushes it off whenever I mention it. but he is not himself anymore. He seems distracted, pressured. I have tried talking to him twice, and both times Claire somehow appeared before he could answer honestly. My chest tightened painfully. Noelle had seen it too. The distance. The manipulation hidden beneath Claire's perfect smile and careful manners. I sank deeper into the leather chair while shadows from the desk lamp stretched softly across the office walls. There were several more pages inside the envelope. Some contained account information and legal notes written carefully in Noelle's precise handwriting. But others felt more personal, like a husband trying desperately to protect his wife after realizing he might not live long enough to do it himself. There is something else you need to know, one paragraph began. Last spring, I overheard Claire speaking to a realtor in our backyard during Ryan's birthday dinner. She thought I was inside watching television. She told him the house would probably be available sooner than people expected. My stomach turned cold instantly. I remembered that dinner perfectly now. Claire insisting on hosting outside because the weather was warm enough for string lights and wine on the patio. Ryan grilling steaks while Claire laughed too loudly beside the garden Noelle spent years building. At one point, I had gone inside for more ice while Noelle stayed outdoors, alone near the roses. When he finally came back inside later, he looked unusually quiet for the rest of the evening. I thought he was simply tired. Dear God, he had hurt her. My eyes moved lower across the page. I did not tell you because I needed certainty first. I hoped I was imagining things. I hoped grief over my health scare had made me paranoid. But then Claire began asking questions about changing locks and property taxes. Last month, she even asked me whether my life insurance covered assisted living expenses for surviving spouses. Assisted living. The words blurred slightly as tears filled my eyes for the first time since the funeral. Not dramatic tears, just quiet ones slipping down my face while I sat alone in Noelle's office holding proof that my husband had spent his final months worrying about what would happen to me after he was gone. I pressed my hand against my mouth and closed my eyes briefly. Noelle had carried this fear alone, protected me from it while he still could. The next page contained something different. A list of names and phone numbers. Lawyer. Financial advisor. Bank manager. Beside one name Noelle had written in capital letters. Trust documents only through Harrison Cole. I recognized the name immediately. Harrison Cole had been Noelle's attorney for nearly 20 years. Careful, quiet, impossible to intimidate. Noelle trusted him completely. At the bottom of the page, another note waited in Noelle's handwriting. Evelyn, listen carefully to me now. If anyone pressures you to leave this house quickly, do not sign anything. Do not agree to temporary arrangements. Do not move into any motel, apartment, or retirement community until you speak to Harrison personally. There are protections in place that only activate if you remain here. My pulse slowed strangely as I reread that sentence twice. Protections in place. The room suddenly felt different around me. Less like a sanctuary of memories and more like the edge of something hidden beneath the surface all along. Downstairs, Claire laughed softly at something on television. The sound floated upward through the vent system, warm and polished and perfectly normal. Yet suddenly, every smile she had given me over the past year replayed differently in my mind. Every comment about simplifying life. Every conversation about future plans. Every subtle reminder that large homes became difficult for older people to maintain alone. I understood now that Claire had not been planting ideas recently. She had been building toward this for a very long time. I looked back at Noelle's final page. The handwriting grew slightly shakier near the bottom. I know this will hurt you deeply, sweetheart. It hurts me too. But if I am gone, I need you to remember something important. Kindness is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. People often mistake gentle women for helpless ones. Let them. I stared at those words until my breathing steadied again. Then slowly, I folded the papers back into the envelope and wiped my eyes carefully with the sleeve of my sweater. Somewhere downstairs, Claire opened the refrigerator while Ryan murmured something too quietly to hear. Their voices no longer sounded intimidating to me now. Just careless. Overconfident. Like people celebrating ownership of something they had not actually secured yet. I placed Noelle's envelope carefully back inside the gray box and looked around the office one more time. The jazz records. The photographs. The old reading lamp beside the bookshelf. For the first time since the funeral, the grief inside me shifted slightly. It was still there, heavy, permanent. But underneath it, something else had begun taking shape. Not panic, not fear, understanding. Because suddenly I realized Noel had not left me defenseless after all. He had left me prepared. The following Sunday, Claire hosted dinner like nothing in the world had changed. By late afternoon, the house smelled of rosemary chicken and expensive candles, while soft jazz played through the kitchen speakers Noel once installed himself. She moved through the dining room wearing cream-colored slacks and a fitted sweater, smiling easily as she arranged wine glasses across the long mahogany table. Anyone walking into the house would have thought we were preparing for a holiday gathering instead of surviving the first week after my husband's funeral. I stood quietly near the sink drying dishes while Claire adjusted silverware placements for the third time. "Melissa and Greg should be here around 6, she said casually. "And the realtor is stopping by briefly beforehand." I folded the kitchen towel slowly. "The realtor?" Claire glanced at me with practiced innocence. "Just a family friend. He is giving us ideas about future improvements." Future improvements. The phrase barely touched me now. After reading Noel's letter, Claire's words no longer confused me. They revealed her. Ryan entered carrying a case of sparkling water from the garage. "Do we really need to do this tonight?" he asked quietly. Claire looked at him with patient disappointment, the same expression teachers use with children refusing homework. "Life keeps moving, Ryan. We cannot sit frozen forever." He did not answer. Instead, he avoided both our eyes and disappeared upstairs again. I watched him go while sadness settled gently through me. Not sharp anymore, just heavy. I wondered when exactly my son had become so afraid of disappointing his wife that disappointing his mother felt easier. By 6:15, the house filled with soft conversation and careful laughter. Melissa and Greg Grayson arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine. Then came Nathan Keller, the realtor Claire mentioned earlier. He was younger than I expected, well-dressed, confident, the type of man who spoke in polished phrases about market opportunity and investment timing. Claire led him through the living room almost immediately, gesturing toward the staircase and open kitchen while discussing renovation ideas as though she already owned every inch of the house. "The upstairs layout has incredible potential," she said brightly, "especially once we open a few walls and modernize the master suite." Nathan nodded approvingly. "Homes in this neighborhood are going for excellent numbers right now, especially properties with updated interiors." I sat quietly near the fireplace, holding a cup of tea while they talked around me instead of to me. The conversation moved over my life like I was already absent from it. Ryan remained unusually quiet throughout dinner preparation. He opened cabinets mechanically, refilled drinks automatically, smiled when expected. But tension followed him everywhere now. Every time Claire mentioned renovation costs or resale value, his shoulders tightened slightly. I noticed because Noel used to tense exactly the same way whenever something troubled him deeply. "Evelyn," Claire called sweetly from the dining room. "Would you mind sitting at the breakfast nook tonight? We need the extra seats for everyone at the main table." Her tone sounded perfectly reasonable, generous even, like she was asking a small favor instead of quietly removing me from my own dining room. Melissa looked uncomfortable immediately. Greg focused very hard on unfolding his napkin. Nathan pretended not to notice anything at all. Ryan finally looked up from his plate. For one brief second, guilt flashed across his face. "Mom can take my seat," he said quietly. Claire smiled at him patiently. "Honey, we already arranged everything." Then she turned back toward me with polished sympathy. "The nook will probably feel more comfortable for you anyway. Less noise." I stared at her for several long seconds. Then I stood slowly, carrying my tea toward the small breakfast nook beside the kitchen windows. "Of course," I said softly. I would not want to disturb the conversation. Claire's smile widened slightly. Victory looked very pretty on her. From the breakfast nook, I could still hear everything clearly. Nathan discussed projected home values, while Claire asked questions about open-concept remodeling and luxury finishes. At one point she laughed lightly and said, "This house has amazing bones. It just needs fresh energy." Fresh energy. I looked around the kitchen quietly while they talked. Noel's copper pans still hung above the island exactly where he placed them. His gardening boots remained beside the mudroom door. The framed photograph from our 30th anniversary still sat on the piano near the hallway. There was nothing lifeless about this house. The only coldness inside it came from the people trying to erase its history. Halfway through dinner, Claire stood and carried dessert plates into the kitchen. As she passed the breakfast nook, she leaned. slightly closer, and lowered her voice just enough for only me to hear. "You know," she said softly, "starting over somewhere smaller could actually be freeing for you." I looked up at her calmly. "Is that what you tell yourself?" Her expression flickered for half a second before smoothing perfectly again. "I am only trying to help." Then she walked away smiling. Across the room, Nathan raised his wine glass toward Ryan. "You and Claire are smart to think ahead," he said. "A property like this can completely transform a couple's future." Ryan forced a weak smile, but did not answer. I watched my son carefully then. Really watched him. The exhaustion beneath his eyes. The hesitation every time Claire spoke too confidently. The way he kept rubbing his wedding ring against his thumb whenever the house came up in conversation. Suddenly, I understood something Noelle probably realized long before I did. Claire controlled rooms by making everyone else uncomfortable enough to surrender quietly. Ryan had not become cruel exactly. He had become weak. And weak people often stand beside terrible things simply because resisting them feels harder. Dessert ended around 9. Guests slowly gathered coats while Claire walked Nathan toward the front door, discussing contractor recommendations. I remained seated alone at the breakfast nook long after everyone else stood up. The kitchen lights reflected softly against the dark backyard windows while dishes cooled untouched beside the sink. Then I heard Claire laugh lightly near the foyer and say words that finally removed every remaining trace of doubt inside me. "Once everything is officially settled," she told Nathan, "this house is going to be ours." The next morning, I woke before sunrise for the first time in years without feeling lost. The grief was still there. It always would be. But underneath it now lived something steadier. Direction. I dressed carefully in dark slacks and a navy wool coat before leaving the house just after 7. The air outside smelled like wet pavement and fallen leaves while pale morning fog drifted low across Maplewood Drive. Claire's car remained in the driveway beside Ryan's truck. Both of them still. Asleep upstairs, probably believing I had nowhere left to go except quietly out of their way. I carried Noelle's envelope inside my purse the entire drive downtown. Harrison Cole's office occupied the 3rd floor of an old brick building near the courthouse. Noelle always liked the place because it felt solid, reliable. Anyone who spends money on marble fountains instead of good filing systems should never handle your legal documents, he once joked after firing another attorney years ago. When I stepped out of the elevator, the receptionist recognized me immediately. Her expression softened. "Mrs. Harper," she said gently. "I am so sorry about Mr. Harper." "Thank you," I answered quietly. "Is Harrison available? He will make time for you." She disappeared briefly down the hallway before returning a minute later. "Right this way." Harrison Cole looked older than I remembered. Thinner too, but his sharp gray eyes missed nothing. He stood the moment I entered his office and shook my hand warmly. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I wish this meeting were under better circumstances." I sat carefully across from his desk, while morning sunlight filtered through tall windows overlooking downtown traffic below. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then I removed Noelle's envelope from my purse and placed it gently on the desk between us. Harrison's expression changed immediately the moment he saw Noelle's handwriting. "He left this for me," I said quietly. Harrison adjusted his glasses slowly before opening the envelope. The silence in the room stretched long while he read through the pages carefully. Once, then again. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled softly. "Noelle called me 3 months ago," he said. "He wanted to review certain protections regarding the property and family trust." My pulse slowed. "Protections?" Harrison folded his hands neatly across the desk. "Your husband became concerned that you might face pressure to leave the house after his death." Hearing someone else say the words aloud made everything feel painfully real in a way it had not before. I stared out the office window toward the busy intersection below while Harrison continued carefully. "Noelle established a trust structure several years ago. The house itself remains protected under very specific conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Harrison studied me quietly for a moment before answering. "As long as you choose to remain in the residence voluntarily, you maintain lifetime occupancy rights. No one can legally remove you. No one can force a sale." Something inside my chest loosened slowly for the first time since the funeral. Harrison opened another folder from his desk drawer and slid several documents toward me. "There is more," he added. "Noelle also included a secondary clause involving Ryan's inheritance." I looked down at the papers but did not touch them yet. What kind of clause? Harrison's voice remained calm and professional. If any beneficiary attempts to pressure, manipulate, or coerce you into surrendering residency rights, that individual forfeits their inheritance share immediately. The room went completely still around me. Outside, a siren echoed faintly somewhere downtown before fading into traffic noise. I blinked slowly. You mean Ryan? Harrison nodded once. Your husband anticipated potential conflict. He wanted safeguards in place. My hands rested quietly in my lap, while emotion moved through me too deep for tears now. Noel had known. Not everything perhaps, but enough. Enough to protect me carefully even after he was gone. Harrison leaned slightly forward. Evelyn, has anyone directly pressured you already? I thought about the motel brochure, the locksmith, the breakfast nook, Claire discussing renovation plans while I sat 10 feet away listening to strangers redesign my life. But strangely, I no longer felt humiliated remembering those moments now. Only clarity. Yes, I answered softly. Harrison's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Then legally speaking, certain provisions could already be activated. He opened another folder and removed a typed document marked confidential. If you wish, I can formally notify Ryan immediately. I looked down at the paper for several long seconds before shaking my head slowly. Not yet. Harrison watched me carefully. Are you certain? I nodded again. Very. Because suddenly I understood something important about people like Claire. She believed power came from controlling information, from making other people feel small, confused, uncertain. She thought silence meant weakness because she had never understood the difference between silence and patience. Harrison placed the documents back into their folders neatly. Your husband trusted you deeply, he said quietly. He believed you would know the right moment. I smiled faintly for the first time in days. Noel always did overestimate me. No, Harrison replied softly. I do not believe he did. When I finally left the office nearly an hour later, the fog had burned away completely. Sunlight reflected brightly across downtown windows, while people hurried along sidewalks carrying coffee cups and briefcases and ordinary worries. I stood beside my car for a moment breathing in the cold November air. Somewhere across town, Claire was probably discussing paint colors over breakfast while Ryan avoided difficult conversations like always. They still believed they were waiting for an elderly widow to surrender quietly. They still believed the house was eventually becoming theirs. I slid into the driver's seat calmly and rested my hands against the steering wheel. Then, for the first time since Noel's funeral, I smiled. Everything changed after Thanksgiving. Before that, Claire moved through the house with the confidence of someone already measuring curtains for rooms she believed belonged to her. After Thanksgiving, tiny fractures began appearing everywhere. I noticed it first in Ryan. He stopped talking about renovations entirely, stopped discussing contractors, stopped making eye contact whenever Claire brought up future plans. Something inside him had shifted quietly after he overheard part of my phone conversation with Harrison Cole 2 days earlier. I had been standing near the kitchen window discussing estate paperwork while Ryan entered unexpectedly through the garage. I only noticed him after saying the words, "occupancy protections" aloud. He froze beside the mudroom bench for half a second before quietly backing out again without speaking. Since then, tension lived in the house like a storm waiting behind closed doors. Claire noticed it too, which only made her push harder. The Monday after Thanksgiving, 3 large sample boards appeared across the dining room table. Hardwood stains, countertop finishes, cabinet colors. Claire spent almost the entire afternoon arranging them beneath the chandelier while speaking excitedly on speakerphone with Nathan Keller. The kitchen absolutely needs to be opened up, she said brightly while holding pale marble samples against the walls. And once we remove the formal dining room, the entire downstairs will feel twice as large. I sat quietly nearby reading one of Noelle's old mystery novels while she talked around me like I was invisible furniture. At one point Nathan asked casually, "Have you finalized ownership transfer timing yet?" Claire laughed lightly. "Almost. We are just sorting through a few technical things." Technical things. I nearly smiled. Ryan arrived home earlier than usual that evening. The moment he stepped into the dining room and saw the renovation boards spread across the table, his entire expression tightened. "Claire," he said quietly, "can we maybe slow down a little?" She looked up sharply. "Slow down. It has not even been a month." Claire set down a cabinet sample carefully. Ryan, your mother cannot maintain this house forever. That is not the point. Then what is the point? She asked calmly. Because honestly, lately you seem nervous every time the house comes up. I kept my eyes on the pages of my book while silence stretched tightly between them. Finally, Ryan rubbed both hands across his face tiredly. I just think maybe we should wait before making plans. Claire stared at him for several seconds. Then her eyes shifted slowly toward me. The room temperature seemed to change instantly. Did something happen while I was out yesterday? She asked carefully. Ryan hesitated too long before answering. No, Claire smiled. Small, cold, dangerous, interesting. That night, I heard them arguing downstairs after midnight. Not shouting. Claire never shouted. She specialized in controlled disappointment delivered quietly enough to sound reasonable. But walls carry tension even when voices stay soft. You are acting paranoid, she murmured sharply. I just think we should understand everything first. Understand what exactly? Ryan did not answer immediately. Then finally, quietly, Dad may have arranged things differently than we thought. The silence afterward lasted so long I wondered if Claire had stopped breathing entirely. The next morning, she became sweeter than ever, which frightened me far more than anger would have. She made Ryan elaborate breakfasts, kissed his cheek constantly, spoke about future vacations and furniture shopping and fresh starts. But beneath all that polished affection lived panic now. I could see it in the way she watched me whenever she thought I was not paying attention. Like someone searching for hidden doors in a house they already claimed publicly. 2 days later, Nathan Keller returned unexpectedly. I heard his voice near the front hallway while carrying laundry downstairs. There is just one issue, he said carefully. Claire lowered her voice too much for me to hear clearly, but Nathan continued more firmly this time. I am telling you the property cannot move forward without full legal authorization. The trust restrictions are extremely specific. I stopped halfway down the staircase without making a sound. Claire answered immediately. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake. Papers shuffled softly. According to this, Mrs. Harper retains lifetime residency rights. No sale can occur without her direct approval. My pulse remained perfectly calm now. Below me, Claire said nothing for several long seconds. Then finally, very quietly, and if she leaves voluntarily? Nathan hesitated. That changes certain conditions. But honestly, your attorney should explain the details. I stepped back upstairs before they noticed me listening. Inside my bedroom, I folded towels carefully while sunlight moved slowly across the carpet. Downstairs, the front door closed harder than usual. A few minutes later, Claire entered the kitchen so abruptly that cabinet doors rattled. Ryan, she snapped. His footsteps followed quickly from the den. What happened? Your father lied to us. Ryan's voice sounded exhausted already. Claire, no, she interrupted sharply. Do not Claire me right now. Why would he create something like this? Maybe because he was trying to protect Mom. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then Claire laughed once. Short, disbelieving. Protect her from what exactly? Ryan did not answer. Because finally, painfully, he knew. That evening, dinner passed in near silence. Claire barely touched her food. Ryan stared at his plate like a man realizing too late he helped build a trap around himself. I ate quietly beside the kitchen window while cold December rain tapped softly against the glass. Halfway through the meal, Claire finally looked directly at me for the first time all day. Her smile returned slowly, but now I could see the cracks beneath it clearly. You seem very calm lately, Evelyn, she said softly. I folded my napkin carefully before answering. So do you? Our eyes held across the table for several long seconds. Then Claire looked away first. By January, the house no longer sounded the same. The tension that once hid quietly beneath polished smiles had finally risen fully into the open. Claire stopped pretending to be patient. Cabinet doors slammed harder. Conversations ended abruptly whenever I entered a room. Ryan looked exhausted almost constantly now, the shadows beneath his eyes darker each morning as bills, legal calls, and arguments slowly crushed whatever confidence he still had left. The renovations never happened. Nathan Keller stopped returning Claire's calls after Harrison formally confirmed the trust restrictions in writing. Every contractor estimate disappeared from the dining room table one by one until only silence remained there beside the untouched centerpiece Noel bought me years ago from a little antique store outside Portland. Winter settled heavily across Maplewood Drive. Snow covered the backyard garden where Noel once spent entire weekends tending roses with impossible care. Some mornings I stood at the kitchen window holding coffee while cardinals gathered near his bird feeder beneath the oak tree. The house felt peaceful again in strange little moments now. Not because the pain was gone, because clarity had replaced confusion. Ryan finally moved into the downstairs guest room after one particularly brutal argument in early February. I never heard the entire conversation, only fragments drifting through the hallway late at night. "You promised," Claire hissed sharply. Then later, Ryan's tired voice answering, "I never promised you the house." After that, the distance between them became impossible to ignore. They stopped eating together, stopped laughing, stopped pretending. Claire spent hours locked inside the upstairs bedroom making angry phone calls behind closed doors while Ryan wandered the house silently, like a man waking slowly from a very long mistake. One afternoon, I found him standing alone in Noel's office staring at the old jazz records beside the bookshelf. He looked up when I entered, his expression hollow with exhaustion. "Dad knew, didn't he?" he asked quietly. I stood beside the doorway for a long moment before answering. "Your father understood people better than most." Ryan lowered his eyes immediately. "I never wanted this to happen." The sadness in his voice felt real. But so did the damage already done. I looked around the office slowly. The leather chair, the reading lamp, the framed photograph from our trip to Maine 20 years earlier. "Wanting matters less than choosing," I said softly. Ryan swallowed hard, but said nothing else. By March, Claire finally moved out. There was no dramatic scene, no screaming, no shattered dishes or cruel speeches. Just quiet defeat wrapped carefully inside designer luggage. I watched from the front window as she loaded suitcases into the trunk of her white SUV one cold gray morning while sleet tapped softly against the driveway. Ryan stood near the garage with both hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. Neither of them looked at each other much anymore. Before leaving, Claire came inside one last time. Her heels clicked sharply across the hardwood floors while the house sat silent around us. She stopped in the foyer beside the staircase and looked at me carefully. For the first time since Noel's funeral, her confidence seemed completely gone. "I suppose you are happy now," she said quietly. I studied her for several seconds. She looked older somehow. Not physically, spiritually. Like bitterness had finally become too heavy to carry elegantly. "No," I answered honestly. I would have preferred kindness from the beginning. Something flickered across her face then. Shame perhaps. Or maybe only frustration that kindness had never mattered enough to her until consequences arrived. Ryan drove her to a hotel near the interstate later that afternoon while she searched for an apartment. When he returned hours later, snow had started falling again outside. He looked broken in a quiet, exhausted way that made him resemble Noel more than ever. "Mom," he said softly while standing awkwardly near the kitchen doorway, "I am sorry." I believed he meant it. But grief teaches strange lessons about forgiveness. Sometimes love survives disappointment. Sometimes trust does not. Spring arrived slowly after that. The roses bloomed again near the backyard fence. I reopened the upstairs windows on warm afternoons and let fresh air move through the house Noel built with his own hands over nearly 4 decades. Some evenings I still missed him so fiercely it felt impossible to breathe properly. But alongside the grief lived gratitude now too. Gratitude that he saw the truth before I did. Gratitude that he protected me even after death. Gratitude that he understood silence could become strength when used carefully. Then one rainy evening in late April, the doorbell rang unexpectedly just after sunset. I opened the front door slowly and found Claire standing there alone beneath the porch light. Her makeup had smudged slightly from the rain, and her expensive coat looked wrinkled for the first time since I met her. She held herself differently now. Smaller somehow. "Ryan said you might still be awake," she said quietly. I nodded once, but did not invite her inside. Rainwater dripped softly from the edge of the porch roof, while headlights passed occasionally along the wet street behind her. Claire looked down for a moment before speaking again. "I just needed somewhere temporary for a few nights," she admitted carefully. The hotel situation became complicated. Hotel. The word hung quietly between us. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, I reached into the hallway table drawer beside the front door. Claire frowned slightly in confusion. Then I removed a small folded brochure and held it gently between my fingers. "The same cheap yellow motel brochure," she placed into my hand beside Noelle's grave months earlier. Recognition drained the color from her face instantly. I extended it toward her calmly. "I thought this might fit your budget now," I said softly. Neither of us spoke after that. The rain continued falling quietly around us, while Claire stared at the brochure, trembling slightly in my hand. Then finally, without another word, she turned and walked back into the darkness alone. I closed the front door gently behind her and stood there for a long moment inside the warm, quiet house that was still mine.